The sun was a searing brand on the Arizona Territory sky, turning the endless expanse of sand and sagebrush a washed-out gold. The year was 1870, and the air was so thick with heat you could almost taste it, like dust and regret. John Silence Carter didn't mind. He preferred the quiet. The silence was an old friend, a balm on the wounds of a past he'd rather forget. His small ranch, a collection of sun-baked adobe and rough-hewn corrals, was his fortress against the world. He had a few head of cattle, enough to get by, and a water well that was the envy of any man for 100 miles. He was a tall man, lean as a fence post, with hands calloused from years of work and eyes that had seen too much. His face was a road map of hard living, a landscape of deep lines around his mouth and eyes that hinted at a life lived on the edge. He was a veteran of the Civil War, and the echoes of it still haunted his quiet nights. He'd come west to bury the man he used to be. He was fixing a broken fence post, the rhythmic thump-thump of his hammer on wood the only sound for miles. A gust of wind kicked up, a hot breath that smelled of dry earth and far-off storms. He paused, squinting at the horizon. Something was different. The wind carried a faint whisper, not of a breeze but of something else, a disturbance. He finished with the post, his movements economical and practiced, and then mounted his horse, a stoic dun he called Dust. He rode toward the whisper on the wind, his rifle resting easy in its scabbard. He was a man who knew the land, knew its moods and its secrets, and this stretch of land was screaming. He found them in a shallow canyon, a narrow cut in the rock that offered a sliver of shade. There were 5 of them, scruffy-looking men with the grime of the trail caked on their faces. Their horses were spent, flanks heaving. They had a woman cornered against the canyon wall. She was Apache, and she was immense. She was taller than any woman he'd ever seen, with shoulders broad as a man's and a fierce, unyielding pride in her posture. Her dark hair was braided with strips of hide, and her eyes, even from this distance, blazed with a fire that no amount of fear could extinguish. She held a knife, a small thing against her size, but she held it like a warrior ready to die. The men laughed, their voices grating and cruel. "Look at her, boys. A big one, ain't she? Thought she'd be easy pickings." The one with the black hat, their leader, spat a wad of tobacco at her feet. "Stole our cattle, she did. Now she's gonna pay." John's hand tightened on the reins. Stolen cattle. He knew the type. They weren't ranchers. They were opportunistic drifters, men who'd rather take what wasn't theirs than earn an honest living. The accusation was likely a lie, a flimsy excuse for a more sinister purpose. He weighed his options. Ride away. It wasn't his fight. He'd learned a long time ago that getting involved in other people's business only led to trouble, but he couldn't. Not with the look on that woman's face. He nudged Dust forward. The men didn't notice him at first, too engrossed in their cruelty. He cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but in the oppressive silence of the canyon, it might as well have been a cannon shot. All 5 men spun around, hands flying to their holsters. The black-hatted leader's grin vanished. Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. A lone wolf. "Let her go," John said, his voice a low rumble. He kept his hands in plain sight, away from his pistol. The leader chuckled, a humorless sound. "And why in the hell would we do that? She's our property now. We caught her red-handed." "She didn't steal your cattle," John said, his eyes hard. "You ain't got the look of men who own anything." The man's face hardened. "That's a powerful accusation, mister. You sure you want to get mixed up in this? We're 5 men. You're just one." John didn't answer. He simply stared, his gaze steady and unblinking. The air crackled with tension. The Apache woman watched him, her eyes flicking from him to the men, a silent question in their depths. "Move on, Rancho," the leader said, his hand now hovering over his gun. "This ain't none of your business." "It is now," John said. That was the last thing he said before the first shot rang out. The canyon erupted in a cacophony of gunfire and dust. John's horse Dust reared back with a whinny, but John held him steady. The first shot whizzed past his head, kicking up a puff of dust from the rock behind him. He didn't draw his pistol. Not yet. He had no intention of killing these men unless he had to. He dismounted, using the horse as a shield, and grabbed his rifle from the scabbard. The men, surprised by his calm, fumbled with their own weapons. He took aim and fired, not at a man but at the canteen hanging from the belt of the nearest outlaw. The leather burst, and a stream of precious water soaked the man's leg. He yelped in surprise and fury, momentarily distracted. "Last chance," John said, his voice flat. "Ride out." "He's playing with us," one of the men yelled. "Kill him!" Another shot rang out, and John returned fire, this time aiming for the shoulder of the black-hatted leader. The man screamed, a guttural sound of pain and rage, and dropped his weapon. The other men, seeing their leader wounded and facing a man who didn't miss, hesitated. The Apache woman seized the moment. With a fierce cry, she lunged forward, her knife flashing. The outlaws, still reeling from John's shots, were caught off guard. She moved with surprising speed, a blur of motion and power. One man went down with a gash across his arm, another with a kick to the gut that sent him sprawling. John saw his opening. He aimed for the legs of the remaining men, sending them to the ground in a tangle of limbs and profanity. The fight was over almost as soon as it began. The 5 men, battered and bruised, lay in the dust, their weapons scattered. The leader, clutching his bleeding shoulder, glared at John. "You'll regret this, Rancher. We'll be back, and we'll bring friends." John didn't respond. He simply collected their pistols and threw them far into the canyon. "Now ride," he said, his voice a cold steel, "and don't look back." The men, defeated and humiliated, scrambled to their feet, mounted their horses, and rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving the canyon to its oppressive silence. John turned his attention to the woman. She was still holding her knife, her chest heaving with exertion. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of suspicion and a cautious curiosity, studied him. Her gaze was as sharp as a hawk's. "You're hurt," he said, nodding toward a deep gash on her arm. It was a fresh wound, still seeping blood. She didn't answer, just watched him, her stance tense and ready to fight again if needed. He slowly knelt down, his movements deliberate to show he meant no harm, and pulled a clean strip of cloth from his saddlebag. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Let me help." He extended the cloth, his hand open. She looked at his hand, then at his face, her eyes searching for any sign of deceit. The fire in them hadn't gone out, but a flicker of uncertainty had replaced some of the defiance. After a long moment, she lowered her knife and offered her arm. He worked with a gentle efficiency, cleaning the wound with a little water from his canteen and binding it with the cloth. She winced but didn't make a sound. Her skin was a warm, coppery brown, and her muscles, even in her relaxed state, were taut and powerful. When he was done, he stood up and faced her. "I'm John." She nodded once, her gaze still fixed on him. "Vento notturno," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "Night wind." He nodded back. "Well, Night Wind, what were those men doing to you?" She shook her head, her expression unreadable. She didn't want to talk about it. He respected that. He looked at the sun, which was now beginning its descent. They couldn't stay here. The men would be back, and they wouldn't be alone. He needed to get her somewhere safe. His ranch. It was the only place he knew. "My place is not far," he said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of his ranch. "You'll be safe there." She hesitated, her eyes scanning the empty desert around them. Her options were few. A solitary man's ranch was a gamble, but so was facing the desert alone, wounded. She gave a curt nod. "We go," she said. He returned to his horse and mounted, then waited for her. She walked with a quiet strength, her bare feet silent on the dusty ground. The sun dipped lower, casting long, dramatic shadows across the landscape. They rode in silence, 2 strangers on a shared path, the canyon of blood and dust fading behind them like a memory. The only sound was the rhythmic tread of Dust's hooves and the soft whisper of the wind, a silent promise of the long journey ahead. The journey back to John's ranch was a quiet one. Night Wind walked alongside Dust, her movements fluid and tireless despite her injury. John watched her, his mind turning over the day's events. He'd never expected to find himself entangled with an Apache woman. The tension between settlers and tribes was a constant hum in the background of their lives, a quiet threat that could explode at any moment. He knew the risks of bringing her to his home. She was a ghost from a different world, and a ghost could bring trouble right to your doorstep. As they moved through the growing twilight, the desert transformed. The golden light faded to a deep lavender, and the jagged rock formations became black silhouettes against the bruised sky. The air, which had been a furnace, now held a cool, dry promise. "You're not from around here," Night Wind said, her voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Her eyes, still sharp and observant in the fading light, had clearly taken in his rancher's gear, his different way of moving. "No," John admitted. "I came from the east." "After the war." She nodded, a knowing look on her face. "The Long War. We call it that too. Many men come west to forget, but the desert remembers everything." Her words hung in the air, a profound truth he felt in his bones. The desert did remember. It held the echoes of every battle, every lost life, every broken promise. He didn't ask her about her own past, or why those men were after her. She was a fortress, just like him, and he knew some walls were meant to be left unbreached. They arrived at the ranch just as the first stars began to pierce the velvet dark. The small adobe house, with smoke curling from its chimney, looked like a lone lantern in a sea of black. The smell of wood smoke and something savory cooking filled the air, his meager dinner of beans and salt pork. John dismounted and tied Dust to the hitching post. "The house is small," he said, "but it's warm. The outlaws won't find us here." Night Wind's gaze swept over the ranch, taking in the corrals, the well, and the small, well-tended garden. She seemed to be assessing him, not just his words, but the life he had built here. "You live alone," she said. "Most of the time," he replied. "It's how I like it." He led her to the house. The interior was simple: a small table, a cot, a fireplace, and a few shelves holding pots and books. He gestured to the cot. "You can rest here. I'll get some water and fresh bindings for that arm." He filled a basin with water from a pitcher, heated it over the fire, and then brought it to her. She watched him carefully, her eyes never leaving his hands. He removed the makeshift bandage he'd put on earlier. The wound was deep but clean. "It will heal," he said, "but you need to rest it." He applied a poultice of herbs he'd gathered, a trick he'd learned from a frontier doctor years ago, and rebandaged the wound with fresh, clean strips of cloth. She didn't flinch. Her stillness was unnerving. She was a stone. After he finished, he offered her a bowl of the beans and salt pork. She took it without a word, her long fingers strong and graceful. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls. The quiet was different from the silence of the desert. This was a shared quiet, a tentative truce between two wary souls. He offered her a blanket, and she sat by the fire, her back straight as a pine tree, her gaze fixed on the flames. He took his place on the floor, his rifle within easy reach. The air was heavy with unspoken questions. He wondered about her people, about why she was alone, about what she was running from. He had saved her, but he was now responsible for her, and that was a burden he wasn't sure he was ready to carry. As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't just saved a woman's life. He had invited a storm into his peaceful, desolate world. The wind outside howled, a restless, searching sound, and he knew that the quiet of his ranch was gone forever. The morning air was crisp and clean, a welcome reprieve from the previous day's heat. John woke before the sun, a habit he'd kept since his army days. Night Wind was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the fireplace, her gaze still fixed on the embers. Her stillness was profound, like a statue carved from dark wood. "Hungry?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded. He went about his morning routine, lighting the fire, preparing coffee, a luxury he savored, and heating up the leftover beans. She watched him, her eyes following every movement, a silent observer. She still hadn't said much, and he didn't push it. Trust was a rare commodity in this land, and it had to be earned. He set a bowl of food and a tin cup of coffee in front of her. She took a sip of the bitter brew, her expression unreadable, then ate the beans with a quiet hunger. "You should stay," John said as he ate his own breakfast, "for a day or two. Those men might still be out there." She finally looked at him, her dark eyes intense. "They will be. They will not forget." He nodded, a sense of foreboding settling over him. He knew men like that. They were like jackals. They would circle and wait, and they would remember the face of the man who had humbled them. "Then staying is a good idea," he said. "My ranch is well hidden. I have enough supplies." She didn't argue. He knew that for her, a proud Apache woman, relying on a white man must be a bitter pill to swallow, but a wounded warrior knows when to rest. After breakfast, he went out to tend to his livestock. He made a point of not looking back, giving her the space she needed. He checked the fences, refilled the water troughs, and then, with a growing sense of unease, he rode out to check his outer perimeter. The land was his only real friend, and he knew its every whisper. Today the whisper was one of warning. He saw it from a ridge, a faint trail of dust in the far distance, moving slowly. He couldn't be sure, but it looked like more than a few riders. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. The outlaws from yesterday were back, and they had kept their promise. They'd brought friends. He spurred Dust into a gallop, racing back to the ranch. When he arrived, Nightwind was standing outside, her head cocked, listening to the wind. She met his gaze, and he saw in her eyes that she knew. "They are coming," she said, her voice a low murmur. "We need to get to the cellar," he said, gesturing to the root cellar behind the house. "It's the safest place." She followed him without question. He grabbed his rifle, a few extra boxes of ammunition, and a canteen of water. They descended into the cool, dark earth of the cellar, pulling the heavy wooden door closed above them. The cellar was small, just big enough for two people to sit uncomfortably. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and stored vegetables. The light, when he lit a small lantern, was a pale, flickering thing. "How many?" she asked, her voice calm. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe 10, maybe more. Those men from yesterday, they were part of a bigger outfit, I reckon." She nodded slowly. "The desert has many eyes. They saw you. They knew where to look." The truth of her words was a bitter pill. He had saved her, but in doing so, he had exposed himself. He had disrupted the fragile peace he had built, and now he was paying the price. They sat in the dark, a shared silence now filled with a different kind of tension. Not a truce, but a siege. The hours crawled by. They heard nothing, but the silence was more frightening than any sound. It was the silence of a predator waiting for its prey to make a move. The sun was high in the sky when they finally heard the first sounds, the creak of leather, the snort of a horse. They were here, and John knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the storm he had invited into his life was only just beginning. The sounds from above were muffled by the thick earth of the cellar, but they were there. The slow, deliberate creak of saddle leather, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of voices. They were methodical, not in a hurry. They were confident. John held his rifle, his knuckles white on the stock. He could feel Nightwind's presence beside him, her stillness a palpable force. He wondered if she was afraid. He was. Not for himself, not really. But he was responsible for her. He had brought this on them, and now he had to get them both out of it alive. He heard the scraping sound of boots on the wood of the front porch. The door to his house creaked open. He strained his ears, trying to make out what they were saying. The voices were a low, indistinct growl, but he caught a few words. "Empty. Looks like he rode out." No sign of her. A wave of relief washed over him, quickly followed by a new, more intense fear. They would search the ranch. They were too smart not to. "They are looking for tracks," Nightwind whispered, her voice barely a breath. "They know we were here." He knew she was right. The dry ground would have a clear record of their movements. He had led them straight to his door. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth, a sudden sharp sound, the shattering of glass. They were ransacking his house. He heard the crash of pottery, the tear of fabric. A cold rage began to build in his chest. His peaceful, solitary life was being torn apart. "They will find the cellar," Nightwind said, her voice still calm, a stark contrast to his rising fury. He knew it. There was no escaping it. The cellar was an obvious place to hide. He thought about his options. He could try to fight them, but he had only a rifle and a pistol against what sounded like a dozen or more men. He would die, and she would be captured. "We wait," he said, his voice a low growl. "We wait for them to come down." The sounds from above continued for what felt like an eternity. They heard the crunch of boots on the ground outside, the shuffling of feet, the low rumble of frustrated voices. Then the sounds came closer. One of the men was standing right above them. John braced himself, his thumb on the hammer of his rifle. He could hear the creak of the cellar door being pried open. A sliver of light appeared, followed by the dark silhouette of a man peering down. "Well, well, looks like we found 'em." The voice was a familiar sneer, the leader from yesterday, the one with the wounded shoulder. John didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The man screamed and fell back, a loud thud, followed by a stream of curses. John scrambled to his feet, pulling the heavy wooden door shut, the sound of boots running towards the cellar and the shouts of angry men filling the air. "He's in there! He got Jed!" John knew he had bought them a few moments, but not much more. He had to act. He looked at Night Wind. Her eyes were wide, but she was calm. She was a woman of the desert, and she knew the brutal logic of survival. "I need you to listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "There's an old water tunnel. It goes out about 100 feet. I used it to draw water for the livestock." Her eyes flickered with a new light, a spark of hope. "Where?" "In the back, under the shelves. It's a tight fit. You'll have to crawl. It'll lead you out to a hidden gully. You can get away from there." "And you?" she asked. "I'll keep them busy," he said, a grim smile on his face. He had a plan, a desperate, last-ditch effort. He would make them pay for every broken piece of pottery, for every moment of peace they had stolen. She didn't argue. She just looked at him, a flicker of something in her eyes, not gratitude, but a silent acknowledgement. She went to the back of the cellar and began to move the heavy wooden shelves. The tunnel was small, barely a man's width. "You go," he said. "Now." She looked at him one last time, a long, searching gaze. "Hey, she said, a word he didn't understand. Then she lowered herself into the dark tunnel and was gone. He heard the heavy thud of footsteps on the door above him. They were trying to break it down. He stood his ground, his rifle raised, ready to face the men who had come to steal his peace. He was a soldier again, a ghost of his former self, ready to fight for a cause he had just discovered. The survival of a woman he barely knew, a woman who had, in the span of a day, become his unexpected burden and his unlikely ally. The sound of splintering wood filled the cellar as the outlaws hammered at the door with a log. John stood ready, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. He had no idea if Night Wind had made it to the tunnel, but he had to assume she had. He was on his own now, a single man against a pack of wolves. The door finally gave way with a deafening crack. Light flooded the small space, and a half-dozen men with rifles and pistols swarmed the opening. The leader, his arm bandaged with a dirty rag, stood in front, a sneer on his face. "Get him!" he yelled. "Don't kill him! I want him to feel this!" John didn't wait. He fired his rifle, taking out the lantern the man in front was holding. The cellar was plunged into chaos. The men, blinded by the sudden darkness, stumbled and cursed. John used the confusion to his advantage. He ducked behind a stack of firewood, reloaded his rifle, and fired again, aiming for the legs. A man screamed and went down. "He's under there! Get him!" Another voice roared, but John was already moving. He crawled through the narrow spaces between the storage shelves, using the darkness and his knowledge of the cellar to his advantage. He could hear them fumbling, their heavy boots thudding against the earthen floor. They were like bulls in a china shop, clumsy and loud. He reached a small opening, a narrow passage he dug for himself to move more easily. He fired again, a quick, precise shot that took out the oil lamp hanging from a beam. The cellar was now a pitch-black tomb. The outlaws, now completely disoriented, fired blindly into the dark. "Stop! Hold your fire, you damn fools!" The leader's voice bellowed, his voice filled with frustration. "He's just one man! He's a damn ghost!" One of the men shouted back. John smiled grimly in the dark. He had a plan. He waited for a moment of quiet, then whispered, "The woman is gone. You're too late." The leader's voice came back, a low snarl. "You think you're smart, Rancho. We'll find her, and when we do, we'll teach her a lesson she won't forget." "No, you won't," John said, "because you're not leaving here." He heard a sudden movement, and a match was struck, its tiny flame illuminating the leader's face for a brief second. John fired, and the match went out. A collective gasp filled the air. "He's a witch!" a man yelled. "Run! Cowards!" the leader screamed. "He can't shoot what he can't see!" John didn't need to see. He knew the cellar, its every nook and cranny. He fired again, this time aiming for the sound of the leader's voice. A grunt of pain, a heavy thud, and then silence. The other men, hearing their leader go down, didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled out of the cellar and into the bright sunlight, their footsteps a frantic retreat. John waited for a long time, the silence stretching and deepening around him. He finally crept out of the cellar, his eyes adjusting to the harsh light. The ranch was a mess. His house was ransacked, his furniture broken, his books torn apart. But they were gone. He walked to the well, the weight of his actions settling on him. He had fought and he had won. But what had he won? His peace was gone. His ranch was a wreck, and he was a wanted man. The outlaws who had fled would spread the word. He had killed men. And in the west, that kind of news traveled fast. He turned his gaze to the horizon, his eyes searching the empty desert. The sun was rising higher, casting a long shadow behind him. He was a soldier again on a new front, fighting a war he had never asked for. He knew he had to leave. His home was no longer safe. He found Dust, who was still tied up at the hitching post, and saddled him. He packed what little he could, a few supplies, his rifle and his pistol. He looked at the wreckage of his home one last time. A bitter farewell. He had saved a woman, but in doing so, he had lost himself. He was a ghost, a drifter, a man without a home. And the woman he had saved, Nightwind, she was somewhere out there, a promise he had to keep. He mounted Dust and rode into the desolate landscape, the vast expanse of sand and rock swallowing him whole. He was chasing a ghost, a promise, and a new life he never knew he was destined to live. The days that followed were a blur of dust, heat, and relentless travel. John rode east, away from his ranch, away from the trail of destruction and death he had left behind. He was a ghost on the land, moving in the vast empty spaces between the mesas and canyons, avoiding the trails and the towns. He knew the outlaws who had fled would have a story to tell, a powerful one about a lone rancher who had ambushed them. He was a target now, and he had to be as invisible as the wind. He rode for 2 days, sleeping under the stars, his horse a silent companion. The landscape was a painter's canvas of reds, browns, and ochre, with the stark, jagged lines of distant mountains on the horizon. The heat was a constant, oppressive weight, but he was used to it. He was a man made for this kind of emptiness. On the 3rd day, he found her. She was waiting for him at a small hidden spring he had known about for years, a small miracle of life in the middle of a barren landscape. She was sitting by the water, her back straight, her profile a striking silhouette against the rocks. He dismounted, a sense of relief and surprise washing over him. "You knew," he said, his voice hoarse from the dust. She turned to face him, her eyes as deep and dark as the night sky. "The desert speaks," she said. "It told me you would come." He didn't question it. He was a man of logic, but the desert had its own rules, its own language. He watered Dust and filled his canteens, his movements a quiet ritual. He felt a strange sort of peace in her presence. She wasn't an easy companion, but she was a steady one. She was like the rocks around them, unyielding and ancient. They ate a simple meal of dried jerky and hardtack. "Why did you come back?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You saved me. A life for a life. The debt is real." He shook his head. "There is no debt. I did what was right." "How you did what was right for you," she said, "but you put yourself in danger. Now you have no home, you have no people." He didn't deny it. "I had a home. Now I don't. That's the way of things." "Not for my people," she said. "For us, a man who saves one of our own is responsible for her, and she is responsible for him." He felt a new sense of unease. He had not considered the cultural ramifications of his actions. He was a white man in a world with rules he did not understand. He had acted on instinct, on a moral code that was his alone. He hadn't realized that for her it was a profound, life-altering event. "So what happens now?" he asked. "You come with me," she said, her voice firm. "To my people. My father, the chief, will decide." He was a man who had fled from responsibility for a long time. He had built his ranch to escape the expectations of the world. Now he was being asked to step into a world that was even more complex, more dangerous. He was being asked to trust a woman he barely knew, to surrender to a destiny he did not want. He looked at the vast, empty sky, at the sun setting behind the mesas, painting the world in fiery colors. He had no other choice. He had no home to go back to. He was a fugitive, and she was the only path forward. "All right," he said, "I'll come with you, but I make no promises." A hint of a smile, a rare, fleeting thing, touched her lips. "The desert does not care for promises, John Carter. It cares for survival." They began to walk, leaving the spring behind, moving deeper into the unforgiving land. He was no longer a lone rancher. He was a man on a mission, on a journey into a world he did not understand, a world of ancient traditions and unspoken debts. The sun set and the stars emerged, a silent witness to a new, precarious alliance forged in the heart of the desert. The journey to Nightwind's people was long and arduous. For days they traveled through a landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. a vast indifferent emptiness of sun-baked rock and prickly desert flora. John was a man of the land, but this was a different kind of land, one that was both familiar and utterly alien. Nightwind was an expert navigator. She moved with a silent grace, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts of the wind and the faint whispers of the earth. She seemed to know where every water source was, every patch of shade, every narrow pass through the rock formations. She was a living map, a part of the desert itself. They spoke little, their conversations clipped and to the point. He learned that her name, Vento Notturno, was given to her by her mother, a reflection of her fierce and elusive spirit. She was a skilled hunter, and she was fiercely protective of her people. He learned, without her ever saying it, that she was a leader, a woman of great importance among her people. One evening, as they sat by a small fire, eating the meager remnants of a rabbit she had caught, John asked a question that had been burning inside him for days. "Why were those men after you?" She was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Her face, illuminated by the flickering light, was a study in shadows and secrets. "They said I stole their cattle," she said finally, her voice low. "It was a lie. They were stealing from us. I found them and I tried to stop them." He felt a surge of anger. "They were just like the men who came to my ranch. Scavengers." She nodded. "They are everywhere now, like flies on a rotting corpse. They see our land and they want it. They think we are weak." "They were wrong," he said, looking at the bandage on her arm. "You fought them. 20 of them." She gave a short, humorless laugh. 20 is a small number for a lie. It was 4. The lie grew with the dust they kicked up. He felt a quiet respect for her. She was a woman of truth in a world of lies. He had seen the way those men had looked at her, their cruelty, their sense of entitlement. He had acted on instinct, but now he knew it had been the right instinct. "Your people," he said, changing the subject. "What will they think of me?" "They will see you for what you are," she said. "A man who fought for a woman he did not know, a man who honored a truth he did not understand. My father, he will decide. He is a man of honor." He felt a new kind of anxiety. He was used to being in control of his own destiny. Now, his fate lay in the hands of a man he had never met, a chief of a tribe he had been taught to see as an enemy. He was an outsider, a ghost in a world that had no place for him. They continued their journey in the silence of the night, the vast, star-strewn sky a silent witness to their slow, deliberate march toward a future he could not see. He was a man who had sought isolation, and now he was walking straight into the heart of a community, a culture and a conflict he had spent his life avoiding. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man walking into a new, uncertain future, a future tied to a woman of the wind and a promise he never knew he had made. The air changed first, a subtle shift from the dry, dusty wind to something with a hint of wood smoke and life. Then came the signs: a broken twig, a faint path worn into the rock, the unmistakable scent of a campfire. John's senses, honed by years of living on the frontier, told him they were close. They crested a rise, and there it was, the Apache encampment. It was a sight he had never imagined, a collection of dozens of wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings made of branches and brush, clustered in a hidden valley, sheltered by high canyon walls. Smoke rose from several campfires, and the sounds of children's laughter, the murmur of voices and the soft nicker of horses filled the air. He felt a jolt of anxiety. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He was not just a lone rancher anymore. He was a white man, an outsider, walking into the heart of a people who had every reason to be suspicious of him. Nightwind noticed his tension. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch firm and reassuring. "Do not be afraid," she said. "They are my people. They are not like the men you know." He nodded, but his grip on the reins was tight. He could feel the weight of their history, the years of conflict and bloodshed, hanging in the air between them. As they rode closer, the camp grew quiet. The children stopped playing. The women paused their work. Men, armed with rifles and bows, emerged from the wickiups, their faces stoic and watchful. Their eyes, dark and unblinking, were fixed on John. Nightwind dismounted with a fluid grace. She walked forward, her head held high, and spoke to an older man who stepped out to meet her. He was tall, with a dignified presence and a face that was a roadmap of a long and difficult life. This was the chief. This was her father. She spoke in her native tongue, her voice a rapid, melodic stream. John couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the emotion in her voice, a mix of urgency, respect, and a hint of pride. The chief listened, his gaze never leaving John. He saw the chief's eyes flick to Nightwind's bandaged arm, and a frown creased his forehead. When she was finished, the chief turned to John. His eyes were the color of dark earth, and they held an intelligence and a power that was both humbling and intimidating. "She says you saved her life," the chief said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. His English was slow but clear, with a cadence that was unlike any John had ever heard. "I did," John said, his voice flat. He saw no need for embellishment. "She says you fought many men," the chief continued, "and that they pursued you to your home." "Yes." The chief's gaze was piercing. "She says you have no home now, that you lost it to save her." John said nothing. He had no home, but he had not lost it. He had left it. It was a subtle difference, but an important one. He had made a choice. The chief finally broke his gaze and turned to his daughter. They spoke again, a rapid exchange that was filled with gestures and glances. John could feel the weight of their decision, a silent judgment that hung over him. He was a prisoner of his own actions, a man who had done the right thing and was now facing the consequences. The chief finally turned back to him. "You came here with her," he said. "You walked into our land, a man alone, with no weapons raised. You have shown honor, and for that we will show you honor in return." A wave of relief washed over John, so powerful it almost made him sway in the saddle. He was not a prisoner. He was not an enemy. He was something else. "You are now a guest of our people," the chief said. "You will be safe. You will be cared for. This is our law. You have saved a daughter of the people, and now you are a son." John looked at Nightwind. She was watching him, a quiet triumph in her eyes. He had come here as an outsider, a ghost, but in a strange, unexpected way, he had found a new home. He had walked into the fire, and he had come out on the other side not as a hero but as something more, a man with a place in the world, however strange and uncertain that place might be. The sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light on the encampment, and in the heart of a land he had once seen as empty, John realized he was no longer alone. John Carter dismounted dust, his body a mix of exhaustion and apprehension. The chief, a man of quiet authority, had offered a wickiup at the edge of the camp, a small, humble dwelling made of branches and hides. It was clear this was a gesture of cautious hospitality, a place for the outsider, not a full integration. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke roasting meat, and a kind of human energy he hadn't felt in years. Dozens of eyes were on him, the gazes of a people who had learned to read every line of a stranger's face. Nightwind spoke to him in a low voice, her tone a blend of instruction and reassurance. "This is your home now, for as long as you need. My brother, he will bring you food." Her words were a bridge over a vast cultural chasm. A young man, lean and quick, approached with a bowl of stew and a small loaf of bread. He handed them to John without a word, his expression unreadable. John nodded a thank you, but the young man simply turned and walked away. The silence was palpable. John could feel the history in their stares, the memory of broken treaties, of land stolen, of lives lost. He was a white man in an Apache camp, a walking contradiction in a world that had no use for one. He ate in the quiet of his wickiup, the taste of the rich stew a welcome change from dried jerky. The food was simple but nourishing. As he ate, he watched the camp come to life. Children, their initial curiosity overcome by youthful exuberance, began to play again, their laughter a sound that had been absent from his life for too long. Women sat together, weaving baskets and talking in their rhythmic, melodic language. Men worked on their horses or honed their weapons, their movements economical and purposeful. John was a ghost in this vibrant world. He was a man of routines, of silent chores, of a life lived in a fortress of his own making. Here life was a shared experience, a collective rhythm. He was an observer, and he felt a profound sense of isolation. Later that evening, the chief, whose name was Skywalker, came to his wickiup. He didn't speak English, so Nightwind came with him, acting as a translator. "My father asks about your past," Nightwind said, her gaze steady. "He wishes to understand the man who saved his daughter." John took a deep breath. His past was a heavy cloak he wore every day. "I was a soldier. In the war, the Civil War, I fought for the Union." He saw no reason to lie. Truth was all he had left. Skywalker listened, his face a mask of solemnity. He asks if you have a family. No, John said, the word a stone in his throat. Not anymore. He asks why you came to this land. To get away, John said, looking at the fire. To forget. Skywalker nodded slowly. He understood that kind of pain. He had seen it in the eyes of his own warriors. He says the desert does not let you forget. It gives you space to remember, to live with your ghosts. The conversation was a one-way street of him giving information, them receiving it, and a profound, wordless understanding passing between them. John felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a connection, however tenuous. He was being seen, not for his race, but for the man he was, for the burdens he carried. Night Wind left him with a final word. My father. He is not a man who gives his trust easily. You have earned a little, but you must earn the rest. He understood. He was an outlier, a man who didn't fit, a man with a past that could be a weapon against them. He had to prove he was a friend, not a ghost waiting to haunt them. He sat by the fire long after they left, the embers a pale reflection of his inner turmoil. He was no longer a lone man in the desert. He was part of something bigger, something more complex, something far more dangerous. He was a ghost, yes, but ghosts could be a part of a family too, and he was about to find out just what kind of family this was. The first few weeks were an exercise in learning and observation. John, a man of solitary routines, found himself immersed in the vibrant life of the Apache encampment. He was not fully accepted yet. The younger warriors in particular looked at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. They called him the Ghost in their language, a name he understood from the look in their eyes. But Skywalker and Night Wind had made it clear he was to be respected as a guest. John spent his days learning by watching. He saw how the women prepared food, ground corn into flour, and wove intricate baskets from yucca plants. He watched the men train with bows and lances, their movements swift and silent. He learned the rhythms of their day, the way they moved as a single organism, a collective body. One afternoon, Night Wind came to him with a bundle of herbs. You know plants? She asked. Some, he replied, for wounds, for poultices. He had learned a few tricks from a battlefield doctor during the war. She smiled, a rare, fleeting thing. My mother, she was a healer. She taught me. Come. She led him out of the camp and into the desert, her steps light and sure. She pointed out a small, unassuming plant with tiny white flowers. This is for the stomach. It makes a man strong. She showed him a broad-leafed plant with a milky sap. This for a burn, it cools the fire. He listened, fascinated. This was a knowledge he had never possessed. He had lived on the land, but he had never truly understood its language. He had seen it as something to conquer, to tame. They saw it as something to live with, to learn from. Your arm, he said, looking at her healing wound. How is it? It is good, she said. The wound is a scar now, a story. He felt the weight of her words. A scar was not a flaw. It was a testament to survival. He had many scars, both on his body and in his soul. He had never seen them as stories before. They walked and talked, their conversation a mix of English and the few Apache words she taught him. He learned about her family, her mother who had passed away years ago, her brother who was a warrior in training. She learned about his life as a rancher, the long, lonely days, the simple satisfaction of a hard day's work. Their conversation shifted from plants to more personal things. You fought many men, she said, her eyes fixed on his. You did not have to fight for me. You could have left me. It was the right thing to do, he said. What is right? She asked, a genuine question in her voice. What makes a man choose to fight for a stranger? He thought about it for a long time. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I was tired of just watching. I had watched too much during the war. I didn't want to watch anymore. She nodded, a knowing look on her face. You did not fight for me. You fought for yourself, to be a different kind of man. Her words hit him with a profound truth. She saw him. She saw the core of him, the part of him that was tired of the past, the part that wanted to be more than just a survivor. They walked back to the camp as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. The air was cool now, a balm on his skin. He felt a different kind of peace. It was not the peace of solitude, but the peace of a slow, cautious connection. He was still a ghost in the camp, but maybe, just maybe, he was becoming a ghost with a family. He had come here to forget, but he was finding that this land, with its quiet rhythms and its deep wisdom, was helping him to remember the kind of man he wanted to be. The fragile peace of the encampment was shattered one afternoon. A scouting party, led by Nightwind's brother, Silent Bow, returned with grim news. They had found tracks, not of a few men, but of a large party. They were riding west, away from the ranch, but they were not going far. They had set up a temporary camp. Nightwind, translating for her father, relayed the information. "They are angry," she said, her voice taut with tension. "They will not forget what you did. They have brought more men." A wave of dread washed over John. He had known this was a possibility, but he had hoped his escape had been clean. The desert was a harsh mistress, but it was also a keeper of secrets. He had left too many behind. Skywalker gathered the warriors in the center of the camp. His voice was a low, urgent murmur, and the men listened with a fierce concentration. John watched, a helpless outsider. He was the reason for this new danger, and he felt a crushing weight of responsibility. Later that evening, he sat with Nightwind by the fire, the sounds of the camp a muted backdrop to their conversation. "I am sorry," he said, the words heavy on his tongue. "I brought this upon your people." She shook her head. "No, this was coming. They see our land. They see our homes. It was a matter of time. You just brought the fire closer. What will you do?" "We will fight," she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. "We have always fought. We will not run." John looked at her, at the strength in her face, the quiet determination. He admired it, but he also knew the grim reality of a fight like this. The outlaws would have better weapons, more ammunition. They were not warriors. They were killers. "I can help," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You know our ways?" "No," he admitted. "But I know their ways, I know how they think, I know how they fight." She was silent for a moment, considering his words. "How can you help?" He drew a rough map in the sand with a stick. "They will not attack head-on. They will try to find a weakness, a way in. We can set traps. We can use the land against them. We can use the element of surprise." He spoke of tactics he had learned in the war, of ambushes and defensive positions. He spoke of the kind of brutality he knew these men were capable of. Nightwind translated his words to her father. Skywalker listened intently, his expression unreadable. When John was finished, the chief spoke in a low voice. "My father says you speak of war," Nightwind translated. "He says this is not our way. Our way is to fight with honor, to fight face to face." "This is not a war of honor," John said, his voice urgent. "This is a fight for survival. They will not fight fair. They will kill your children, your women. You must understand this." The chief's gaze was piercing. He was seeing the darkness John carried, the brutal knowledge of a world he did not want. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "My father says he will listen. He will learn from you." John felt a mix of relief and dread. He was no longer just a guest. He was a war chief now, a man of violence in a world that had, for a brief time, offered him peace. He had come here to forget the past, but the past had followed him, and now it was demanding that he become the man he had once been. He looked at the shadows dancing on the canyon walls, and he knew that the ghost of his old life was about to become a very real and very dangerous presence. The next day, John began to work. He was no longer an observer, he was a participant. He gathered the warriors in the center of the camp, his presence no longer that of a strange guest, but of a man with a purpose. He drew on his experience as a Union soldier, his mind a steel trap of forgotten tactics and brutal realities. He started with the land. He walked the perimeter of the camp with Skywalker and Silent Bow, pointing out weak spots, places where an enemy could approach unseen. "They will come from the south," he said, pointing to a narrow, sandy wash. "It's the easiest way. We can put a trap there. A simple one, nothing that kills, just to give us a warning." Silent Bow, a proud warrior, was skeptical. "Our warriors are our eyes. We see them before they arrive." "They won't be alone," John said, his voice low. "They will have lookouts. They will have men on the high ground. They will come in the dark. They will be silent." He saw the understanding dawn on Silent Bow's face. He was not talking about a raid. He was talking about a siege. He taught them how to create simple tripwires from twisted yucca fibers, things that would snap and make a noise to alert them. He showed them how to set up small rockfalls in narrow canyons, things that could be released to block a path or cause a stampede. He spoke of the importance of fire, of using smoke and light to communicate, to signal. "They will not expect this," John said. "They will expect you to be brave and strong. They will not expect you to be smart. The warriors listened, their faces a mix of curiosity and respect. They were warriors of the bow and the lance, of a fight that was personal and direct. John was teaching them to fight a different kind of war, a war of shadows and whispers. He also worked with their firearms. Many of the Apache warriors had rifles, but they were old, rusted, and often poorly maintained. He showed them how to clean the barrels, how to polish the mechanisms, how to ration their ammunition. "Every shot must count," he said, his voice a low, insistent murmur. "One bullet can change the tide of a battle. A wasted bullet can get you killed." Silent Bow, in particular, was an eager student. He was a young man, full of a warrior's pride, but he was also wise enough to know that a new kind of war was coming. He spent hours with John, listening to him, asking questions, and absorbing every word like a dry sponge. Night Wind was always there, a quiet presence, translating when necessary, but more often just watching. She saw the man he was becoming again, the soldier, the man of action and grim purpose. She saw the weight of his knowledge, the burden he carried. One evening, after a long day of work, she came to him. "My father says you have the heart of a warrior, a ghost warrior." "That's not a compliment where I'm from," John said, a wry smile on his face. "It is here," she said. "A ghost warrior is a man who fights with the shadows. He is invisible. He is silent. He is feared." "I don't want to be feared," he said. "You already are," she said. "The men who chase us, they fear you. They think you are a ghost. And now you are a ghost that has returned. You are a ghost who has a family." He looked at her, at the firelight dancing in her dark eyes. He had come here to escape. He had come here to hide. But he had found a new purpose, a new reason to fight. He was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for her. He was fighting for her people. He was fighting to protect the fragile peace he had found in this hidden valley. The storm was coming, and he was no longer a lone man in the desert. He was a part of the wind now, and he was ready to fight. The storm came in the dead of night. John, standing guard at a high point above the canyon entrance, saw them first. A dozen small flickering lights in the distance, moving with a deliberate slowness. They were smart. They had left their horses behind, intending to approach on foot, silent and unseen. He lit a small fire he had prepared, the agreed-upon signal. The flames licked at the sky, a silent message to the camp below. Within minutes, the camp was awake. The warriors, their faces grim and determined, moved to their positions, their movements as fluid and soundless as the shadows they inhabited. The outlaws, led by the black-hatted man with the wounded shoulder, moved like specters through the desert landscape. They were confident, too confident. They expected to find the camp sleeping, unprepared. They didn't know they were walking into a trap. The first sign of trouble came from the south. The outlaws, moving through the narrow wash, tripped one of the yucca tripwires. A small rock, carefully balanced, tumbled down and hit the canyon floor with a loud thud. A man yelled, a curse-filled shout that echoed off the canyon walls. "Ambush! They're onto us!" The chaos began. The outlaws, now disoriented and on edge, fired blindly into the dark. The Apache warriors, silent and deadly, responded with a volley of arrows, their tips burning with a fierce light. John, from his high vantage point, saw the battle unfold. He was a general now, a ghost directing a phantom army. He fired his rifle, not at the men, but at the ground in front of them, kicking up dust and confusing them further. He was not there to kill, but to create chaos, to disorient. The outlaws, now panicking, tried to retreat, but they were met with a storm of arrows and a volley of rifle fire from the Apache warriors. The outlaws were out of their element. They were used to a brutal face-to-face fight. They were not prepared for a war of shadows and whispers. The battle raged for an hour, a chaotic ballet of fire and fear. John saw Night Wind in the thick of it, her movements a blur of ferocity and grace, her bow a silent, deadly weapon. He saw Silent Bow, a young man who had once been skeptical, now fighting with a warrior's full fury. The outlaws finally broke. With their leader screaming for a retreat, they scrambled back the way they came, a few of them limping, a few of them not moving at all. They had come to kill, and they had found a fight they were not prepared for. John watched them go, a grim satisfaction in his heart. They were defeated but not destroyed. They would be back. They were like a disease, a virus that would return with a new vengeance. He descended from his vantage point and walked to the camp. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. There were casualties on both sides. 3 Apache warriors were wounded, one of them badly. There were a few dead outlaws, their bodies a testament to the brutal reality of the fight. Skywalker walked to him, his face a mask of solemnity. He didn't speak, but his eyes spoke volumes. He saw the soldier in him, the man who had fought to protect them. He saw the ghost who had returned to fight for a new home. Night Wind came to him, her face smudged with dirt and a streak of blood. She was unharmed. "You were right," she said, her voice a low murmur. "They are not men of honor. They are killers." He nodded, a sense of exhaustion washing over him. He had protected them, but he had also brought the violence to their doorstep. He was no longer just a ghost. He was a part of their war now, a part of their struggle. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the most difficult part of the fight was yet to come. The first shot had been fired, and the battle for their survival was only just beginning. The dawn broke over the canyons, a pale and indifferent witness to the night's battle. The silence was heavy, a profound weight that followed the chaos of gunfire and war cries. John walked through the encampment, his boots scuffing the dusty earth. The camp was a study in contrasts. The joyous relief of a successful defense mingled with the solemn grief of loss. 3 warriors had been wounded. One of them, a young man named Running Deer, lay on a bed of blankets, his chest rising and falling with a shallow, painful breath. John knelt beside him, his gaze on the deep wound in his side. He had seen thousands of wounds like this. A bullet. It was a clean shot, but it had torn through his flesh, and it would not heal easily. Night Wind, her face streaked with dirt and blood, was a figure of quiet authority. She moved among the wounded, her hands gentle and sure as she applied poultices and bandages. She was a healer and a warrior, a woman of 2 worlds, just as he was. Skywalker stood over his fallen warriors, his face a mask of profound grief. He had lost men. Men he had known his whole life. Men he had raised. The victory was a bitter one, a testament to the harsh reality that even a successful defense came at a price. John approached the chief, his head bowed in a gesture of respect. "I am sorry for your losses," he said, his voice low. Skywalker looked at him, his dark eyes filled with a deep sadness. "You saved us," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You gave us a chance. You gave us hope." "I brought the fight to your home," John said, the words a confession. "This is on me." "No," the chief said, his voice firm. "This was coming. They see our homes, they see our land, they see our women, they see our children. They were coming for us anyway. You just gave us the strength to fight them. You have shown us a different way, a way of the ghost warrior." The chief's words were a heavy gift, a mark of respect that John felt he had not earned. He was still a man of the white man's world, a man of violence and war. He had used his brutal knowledge to save them, but he was still a killer. Night Wind came to him. She was quiet, her hands still stained with blood. "They will be back," she said. "They are like a wounded animal. They will return with a vengeance." "I know," John said. "This place is no longer safe. They know where we are. They will bring more men. They will bring a bigger fight." She nodded, a grim understanding on her face. "My father, he knows this too. We cannot stay here. We must move." The conversation was a difficult one. This encampment had been their home for generations. They had raised their families here, buried their dead, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. Later that day, the chief gathered the council. John was not invited, but he watched from a distance. The debate was long and impassioned. He could hear the low hum of their voices, the fierce gestures of their hands. It was clear that the decision was a difficult one. To leave their ancestral home, to abandon the graves of their fathers, was a heavy price to pay for a victory. Finally, the chief came out of the council meeting. His face was solemn, but there was a new resolve in his eyes. He gathered his people, and his voice, though low, carried across the camp. He spoke of the danger, of the need for survival, of the hope for a new beginning. He spoke of the ghost warrior, the man who had come from the outside and had saved them. He said they would move. They would leave their home, and they would find a new one, a place where they would be safe, a place where they could live in peace. John felt a deep sense of guilt and responsibility. He had destroyed their peace, but he had also given them a chance at a new one. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man with a purpose, a man who was now responsible for the future of an entire people. He was a ghost warrior, and he knew that the hardest part of his new life was yet to come. The decision to move was made, but the implementation was a monumental task. The encampment, which had been a static community for generations, was now in a state of flux. Families packed their belongings, dismantled their wickiups, and prepared for the long journey. The air was filled with a mix of anticipation and melancholy. The younger generation, filled with the hope of a new future, was excited. The older generation, burdened by the ghosts of the past, was solemn. John, now a figure of quiet authority in the camp, helped where he could. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man with a purpose. He helped the men prepare their horses, packed his own meager belongings, and offered his knowledge of the land. He knew the trails, the water sources, the hidden passes. He was an invaluable asset, a man who had once been a burden, now a leader. He spent most of his time with Nightwind and her father, Skywalker. The chief had taken on a new role, not just a leader, but a visionary. He spoke of a new home, a place of peace, a place where they would be safe from the encroaching world of the white man. He spoke of a new kind of peace, a peace that was not just about hiding, but about living. One evening, as they sat around a small fire, the last fire in their ancestral home, Skywalker looked at John. "You are not like the other men," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have a spirit that is of the wind, a spirit that is of the earth. But you are also a man of war." John nodded. "I have seen too much war. And you have used your knowledge to save us," the chief said. "For that we are grateful, but we cannot fight them forever. We cannot live like this, always on the run." John understood. The outlaws would return, and they would be more numerous, more prepared. They had to find a place that was not just hidden, but defensible, a place that could be a true home, not just a temporary sanctuary. "I know a place," John said, the words a bold, uncalculated risk. "A place I saw on my journey here, a place in the mountains, a place that would be difficult to find, a place that would be easy to defend." Nightwind's eyes, dark and searching, met his. "What kind of place?" "A high place," he said, his voice filled with the memory of a distant landscape. "A place with narrow passes and high cliffs, a place with a clear view of the world, a place where they would not expect us to be." Skywalker listened, his face a mask of solemn thought. He looked at his daughter, then back at John. "You have walked this land. You know its secrets. We will trust you. You will lead us." John felt a wave of responsibility so powerful it took his breath away. He was not just a guest anymore. He was a guide, a leader. He was the ghost warrior, and he was being asked to lead an entire people to a new home, a new life. "I will go first," he said. "I will scout the area. I will make sure it is safe. Nightwind will come with me." The chief nodded. "It is good. You are her eyes. She is your spirit." The words hung in the air, a profound truth. They were a team now, bound not by a debt, but by a shared purpose, a shared destiny. They were a man and a woman who had once been strangers, now joined by a common struggle, a common hope. The next morning, as the sun rose over the canyons, they rode out of the encampment, not as two people, but as two parts of a whole. Their horses' hooves made a soft sound on the dusty earth, a quiet prelude to a new chapter in their lives. They were on a mission to find a new home, and in doing so, they were also building a home of their own, a home of two souls who had once been alone, now united by a single purpose. The journey was a test of both their physical endurance and their growing bond, a pilgrimage through a land that was as beautiful as it was brutal. John and Nightwind rode for days, their conversation a mix of practical necessity and a more personal, profound connection that deepened with every mile they traveled. They were two people from different worlds, united not just by a common enemy, but by the vast indifferent landscape that surrounded them, a landscape that stripped away all pretense and left only their true selves. John, the seasoned rancher, was an expert at reading the land through the lens of logic and survival. He knew where to find water, not by instinct, but by the subtle bend in a dry creek bed or the slight discoloration of the soil. He knew where to find shelter from the sun, not by listening to the whispers of the wind, but by studying the angles of the canyons and the shadows they cast. He was a man of brutal reality, a man who had survived by his wits and his strength, a man who had learned to read a map with the same precision he would use to draw a bead on a target. His world was one of practicality and calculation. Nightwind, the Apache warrior, was a master of the spirit of the land. She spoke its language, not in words, but in the rustle of the leaves and the quiet movements of the animals. She read its whispers in the way the dust swirled in the wind, and she moved with a grace that was both silent and powerful, a testament to her deep, abiding connection to the earth. She was a woman of intuition and of deep connection, a woman who had survived by her knowledge and her heart. Her world was one of harmony and of profound, unspoken truths. They were a perfect team, a living testament to the truth that two different worlds could come together to form a single, powerful whole. John would find a path, a logical route through the winding canyons, and Nightwind would tell him if it was the right one, not by a map, but by the feeling in her spirit, a subtle sense of rightness that he had come to trust implicitly. He would find a shelter, a logical place of defense, and she would tell him if it was safe, her eyes scanning the rock formations, her senses attuned to any hidden dangers. They were a dance of logic and intuition, of masculine and feminine, of a new world and an old one. One evening, as they sat around a small crackling fire, the stars a vast, glittering blanket above them, John looked at her. "Tell me about your people," he said, his voice a low, quiet murmur. "Tell me about the old ways. I know my world is one of fences and property, but what about yours?" She smiled, a quiet, gentle thing that filled her eyes with a new light. "The old ways are in the earth," she said. "They are in the wind. They are in the mountains. We are a part of them. We do not own the land. The land owns us." Her words were a stark contrast to his own past, a past of a world that was measured by what a man could own, by the square footage of his land, by the size of his herd. Her world was measured by what a man could give, by what he could share, by the stories he could tell. She spoke of the legends of her people, of the stories of the stars, of the spirits of the animals. She spoke of her mother, a healer, who had taught her to respect all life, to see the world not as a place to conquer, but as a place to live in harmony with. He listened, his heart open to her words. He had come here to forget, but he was finding that he was remembering things he had never known. He was learning a new language, a language of the heart, a language of the soul. They faced their own challenges on the journey. A sudden sandstorm, a blinding, chaotic force of wind and sand that threatened to disorient and bury them. A narrow pass that was blocked by a rockfall, a daunting wall of stone that stood in their way. A pack of coyotes that stalked them in the night, their eyes a glinting, predatory presence in the darkness. But they faced them together, their bond growing stronger with every obstacle they overcame. He saw the fear in her eyes during the sandstorm, a fleeting vulnerability that was quickly replaced by a fierce determination. She never complained, never wavered, her focus on the task at hand. He saw the way she fought the rockfall, her muscles straining, her body covered in a fine layer of dust, her hands working with a fierce resolve. He saw the way she held her bow, her gaze fixed on the shadows, her body a testament to a warrior's resolve. She, in turn, saw the quiet strength in him, the way he would study a map, his brow furrowed in concentration. She saw the way he would build a fire, a quiet, methodical ritual. She saw the way he would stand guard, his rifle a silent sentinel against the darkness, his body a quiet, powerful presence. She saw the ghost of his past, but she also saw the man he was becoming, a man who was no longer alone, a man who was fighting not for himself, but for a family he had chosen, for a future that was not his, but theirs. They were nearing their destination, a high mountain pass that would lead to a hidden valley. It was a place that was both beautiful and brutal, a place that would be a true home, a place of peace. And as they rode toward it, they knew that their journey was not just about finding a new home. It was about building a new life, a life of two souls who had once been strangers, now bound by a shared destiny, a shared hope, and a shared love that was as vast and as beautiful as the desert itself. The hidden valley was everything John had promised and more. It was a secluded paradise, a place of profound and unyielding beauty. The high cliffs that surrounded it were a natural defense, a shield of stone against any threat. The air was clean and crisp, filled with the scent of tall pines and the sweet fragrance of wild flowers. A crystal-clear stream, a lifeline of liquid silver, ran through a lush green meadow, its gentle murmur a constant calming presence. It was a place of profound peace, a place that felt not just like a destination, but like a true home, a place where a weary soul could finally rest. They spent the first day exploring, their hearts filled with a quiet joy that transcended words. Nightwind was a different person here. The weary resolve that had been etched on her face for weeks was gone, replaced by an unbridled happiness. She ran through the meadow, her feet barely touching the ground, her laughter a sound that was as free and as beautiful as the wind. She knelt by the stream, her hands cupped, her face a reflection of the profound happiness she felt. She drank the water, its cool, life-giving purity a stark contrast to the bitter, dusty water they had been drinking for weeks. She was a woman who had found her way home, a woman who had found her way back to the heart of the land. "This is it," she said, her voice a low, joyful murmur that was filled with a sense of profound relief. "This is our new home, the heart of the mountain." John nodded, a profound sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had found them a new life, a new beginning. He had used his knowledge, his strength, his past, to give them a future. He was no longer a ghost, he was a guide. He had come to this land to escape, but he had found something worth fighting for. The land had once been a place of solitude, a place of escape, but now it was a place of purpose, a place of connection. That evening, as they sat by a fire, the stars a brilliant, glittering tapestry above them, a new kind of silence settled between them. It was not the silence of strangers or of a tentative alliance. It was the silence of two souls who had found their way home, a silence filled with a profound and quiet understanding. Nightwind moved closer to him, her hand finding his, her touch a grounding, comforting presence. "You did this," she said, her voice a whisper filled with a deep and profound gratitude. "You found this place. You gave us hope." "We did it," he corrected, his voice a low, steady rumble. "We found it together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, her body a soft weight against his. He could feel her warmth, her presence, her spirit. He had spent his life running from connection, from intimacy. But now, in the quiet of this hidden valley, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had found a home, not in a place, but in a person. He had found a place where he could finally lay down his burdens, where he could finally stop running. "I have a story to tell you," she said, her voice low. "A story of a woman of the wind, a woman who was lost but who found her way home. She found a ghost who was also a man who was a soldier, but also a man of peace, a man who was a stranger, but who was also family, a man who was lost, but who found his way home not with a map, but with his heart." He listened, his heart open to her words. He had never had a story told about him before, a story that was not about war or about loss. He was a character in her story, a hero in her world, a man who had found his purpose in a world he had once fled. She finished her story, and the silence returned. But it was a silence filled with a new kind of sound, the sound of two hearts beating as one. He turned to her, and his hands, which had been so used to the feel of a rifle and the cold touch of steel, were gentle as they cupped her face. He leaned in, and he kissed her. The kiss was not one of passion or of lust, but of a profound and quiet understanding. It was a kiss that sealed a promise of a new life, a new beginning, a new home. He was a man who had once been alone, a man who had once been a ghost, but now he was a man who had found his way home. And in the arms of the woman of the wind, he knew that his journey was not just a journey of a new life, but a journey of a new heart, a heart that was no longer empty, but filled with the promise of a future that was as vast and as beautiful as the land itself. The journey back to the encampment was filled with a new energy, a palpable hope that had been absent from their hearts for weeks. John and Nightwind rode side by side, their conversation a mix of practical plans and shared hopeful dreams. They spoke of the valley, of the high cliffs and the clear stream, of a place of safety and peace. They spoke of the future, a future that was no longer a distant dream but a tangible reality. The kiss they had shared in the valley was a silent promise, a new language spoken between them that needed no words. He looked at her, at the way the sun caught the intricate beads in her hair, at the quiet strength in her profile, and he felt a profound sense of purpose. He was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man riding towards a new future. When they arrived, the atmosphere of the camp was thick with tension, a heavy weight of fear and uncertainty. The warriors were on high alert, their faces grim with the knowledge that the outlaws could return at any moment. The children were quieter, their laughter subdued, a silent testament to the fear that had been their constant companion for weeks. But when Nightwind and John dismounted, a different energy rippled through the people. They saw the light in Nightwind's eyes, the quiet confidence in John's posture. They knew without a single word being spoken that they had found something. Skywalker met them at the center of the camp, his face a mask of weary resolve, his eyes filled with a deep and profound weariness. Nightwind spoke first, her voice a clear, melodic stream of their native tongue. She spoke of the valley, of the high cliffs and the clear stream, of a place of safety and peace. Her words painted a picture of a new home, a sanctuary in a world that had become increasingly hostile. The people listened, their expressions shifting from doubt to hope, their eyes filled with a new light, a profound sense of relief washing over them. When Nightwind finished, Skywalker turned to John. "Is this place real, Ghost Warrior?" he asked, his voice low and solemn, a tone that was both a question and a plea. "Is it as she says, a place of peace?" "It is, Chief," John replied, his voice firm, a profound sense of conviction in every word. "It is a place of defense, a place of peace. It is a home. I have seen it with my own eyes. It is a place of life." A murmur of relief went through the crowd. The fear that had held them in its grip for days began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. The chief looked at his people, at the faces of the children and the solemn eyes of the elders, and he gave a single resolute nod. "We will go," he said, his voice clear and strong. "We will go to the mountain of promise. We will go to our new home." The preparations began immediately, a feverish but organized chaos. The camp that had been their home for generations was being dismantled. The women packed their belongings, their movements filled with a quiet urgency. The men prepared their horses, their hands working with a fierce resolve. The children, now filled with a new sense of adventure, helped wherever they could, their small hands helping to pack the last of their belongings. There was a sense of profound sadness in the air, the weight of leaving a place filled with so many memories. The elders sat by the last fires, their faces etched with a deep melancholy, their eyes fixed on the graves of their ancestors. This was not just a move, it was a profound act of faith, a step into the unknown. John worked tirelessly, helping to pack the heavy supplies, advising on the best routes, and sharing his knowledge of the land. He was no longer an outsider. He was a leader, a guide. He saw the respect in the eyes of the warriors, the gratitude in the eyes of the elders. He saw the way the children would look at him, their faces filled with a mix of awe and curiosity. He had once been a man who had no place in the world. Now he was the man who was leading an entire people to a new one. That night, as the last of the campfires burned low, Nightwind came to him. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching, their silence a shared language of their hearts. "Are you scared?" she asked, her voice a low, quiet murmur. He thought about it for a long moment. He had been a soldier, a rancher, a man who had faced death more times than he could count. But this was a different kind of fear. It was the fear of responsibility, the fear of failure. "Yes," he admitted, "I am. I have led you to this place. If anything happens..." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch a grounding, reassuring presence. "We are together now," she said. "We are no longer alone. The danger is not on you. It is on all of us, and we will face it together." Her words were a balm to his soul, a comfort that he had not known he needed. He looked at the stars, at the vast, indifferent sky, and he knew that she was right. They were no longer two souls on a journey. They were a part of a whole, a people who had found a new strength, a new hope. He was a ghost warrior, yes, but he was also a man who had found a family, a woman and a new life that was worth fighting for. And as he looked out at the last embers of the fire, he knew that the hardest part of the journey was yet to come. The great exodus was about to begin. The dawn of the next day was a heavy, emotional moment, a silent farewell to a world they would never see again. The camp, which had been a vibrant community for generations, was now a line of solemn faces, a silent procession of burdened horses, and a quiet sense of departure. The air, typically alive with the low hum of daily life, was now filled with the low murmur of voices, the quiet shuffle of feet against the dusty earth, and the rhythmic, sorrowful beat of a single drum. It was a low, steady sound that marked not just the beginning of their journey, but the end of an era. The Apache people were on the move, leaving their ancestral home behind. their eyes fixed on the distant, unyielding promise of the mountains, a promise they held in their hearts as a new beacon of hope. John rode at the head of the procession, his horse, Dust, a steady and reliable guide, its hooves a quiet metronome against the soil. The horse seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, carrying its rider with a calm, deliberate pace. Beside him rode Nightwind, her face a complex mix of determination and profound sadness. She was leaving the land of her ancestors, the place where she had learned to walk, where she had learned to hunt with her father, where she had learned the songs of her people and the lore of her elders. The grief was a physical weight in her heart, but her sadness was tempered by a new resolve, a fierce, protective fire that burned in her eyes. She was a leader now, a beacon of hope for her people, and her strength was their shield. She rode with her head held high, her gaze fixed on the horizon, the intricate beads in her hair catching the first rays of the morning sun as if they were tiny stars. The journey was brutal, a harsh and unforgiving test of their collective will. The sun was a relentless brand on their backs, a blazing orb in a cloudless sky, its heat a suffocating blanket that sapped their energy with every passing hour. The sand, a fine dusty powder, seemed to get into everything, coating their skin, their hair, their belongings, a constant gritty reminder of their hardship. The days were long, each hour stretching into an eternity of walking and riding, and the nights were short and cold, a fleeting relief that was over too soon. The children, though resilient, grew tired and hungry, their small bodies worn down by the constant effort. Their usual playful chatter was replaced by a quiet, weary silence. The elders, their bodies weary from age and the long march, had to be carried on travois, their faces etched with a profound melancholy that spoke of a deep, abiding connection to the land they were leaving behind. The horses, though strong, were exhausted, their flanks heaving with every step, their eyes glazed with fatigue. The great exodus was a test of their endurance, a test of their spirit, a testament to the unbreakable bond of their people. John, the ghost warrior, used his knowledge of the land, a knowledge he had acquired over a lifetime of ranching and surviving, to guide them through the most difficult parts. He found hidden water sources, places where the earth, in its generosity, held a secret spring, a small miracle of life in the middle of a barren, unforgiving landscape. He would dismount, and with a few quiet words and a glance at the surrounding rock formations, he would point to a spot, and the men would dig, their faces filled with a quiet sense of wonder when the cool, life-giving water emerged from the ground. He found narrow passes through the canyons, places where they could rest in the cool, profound shade of the rock, a fleeting sanctuary from the sun's relentless assault. He was a man of the earth, and the earth in turn was a friend to him, whispering its secrets to him, guiding him on a path that few others would have known. But the journey was not just a physical one, it was a psychological one too. The fear of the outlaws, the constant shadow of their presence, was a heavy weight on their minds, a constant nagging dread that settled in the pit of their stomachs. John and Nightwind rode at the front, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, their senses attuned to every whisper of the wind, every rustle in the brush, every distant sound. They were on high alert, their bodies and minds a single unit, a single purpose, a single will. One afternoon, as they stopped to rest in the oppressive silence of the midday sun, a young warrior, his face pale with fear, came to John. His eyes were wide with a quiet terror, and his hands trembled as he spoke. "I saw them," he said, his voice a low, terrified whisper. "They were watching us, from the high ground, like hawks circling their prey." John's heart sank. He had known this was a possibility. The outlaws were like predators, patient and cunning. They were a disease, and they would not stop until they had consumed their prey. He spoke to Nightwind in a low, urgent voice, his words a stream of quiet urgency. "We have to move. They know we're here. They will come in the dark. We cannot rest here. We must keep going." The news spread through the camp like a ripple in a quiet pond. The people, exhausted and weary, knew they had to keep going. They had to push on. The elders, with a quiet strength that belied their age, urged the young to be brave. The women, with a fierce resolve, gathered their children and prepared for the long, hard night ahead. They marched through the night, the moon a pale, silent witness to their slow, deliberate progress. The air was cool now, a balm on their tired bodies, a quiet relief after the brutal heat of the day. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low shuffle of feet, the rhythmic beat of the drum, and the occasional cry of a child, quickly hushed by a mother's gentle hand. John looked at Night Wind, her face a serene mask of determination, a pillar of strength, a beacon of hope. He had once been a man who had no one to fight for. Now he had a people to protect, a woman to guide, a promise to keep. The journey was long and arduous, but they were not alone. They were a family, and they were fighting for a new home, a new life, a new beginning. He was a ghost warrior, and he knew that the battle for their survival was about to begin. The outlaws were close, and the long march was about to become a desperate race for their lives. The scent of danger was now as palpable as the dust beneath their feet. It was a smell John knew from a lifetime of experience. The sharp metallic scent of tension, the acrid telltale tang of fear. John, riding at the rear of the column with Silent Bow and a handful of other warriors, could feel the outlaws' presence like a physical weight on his shoulders. He had studied their tactics, their arrogant confidence born of a lifetime of easy victories. He knew what they were doing. They were not attacking yet. They were herding the tribe, pushing them into a corner, waiting for the right moment to strike. They were like wolves stalking a wounded herd, patient and cruel, waiting for a moment of weakness, for a misstep, for the inevitable collapse. They were enjoying the chase, a perverse game of cat and mouse. The tribe was moving faster now, spurred on by the fear of the enemy's shadow. The long march had become a desperate race. The elders, though weary, found a new strength, their faces etched with a grim resolve that spoke of a lifetime of endurance. They would not give up. The children, no longer just tired, were now silent, their eyes wide with a quiet, profound fear. The warriors, their faces painted with ochre and a deep sense of purpose, were ready to fight, their hands on their weapons, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy. John knew they couldn't outrun them forever. The outlaws were better mounted, more numerous, and fueled by a burning, vengeful rage. He had to use the land against them, just as he had in his own cellar. He had to be a ghost again, a man who could use the shadows to his advantage, a man who could turn the very earth into a weapon. He spoke to Silent Bow in a low, urgent voice. "We must set a trap," he said. "We must slow them down, give the people time to get ahead." Silent Bow, his face a grim mask of resolve, nodded. "What is your plan, ghost warrior?" John looked at the rugged, canyon-laced terrain. He had a plan, a risky, desperate one. "I know a place," he said. "A narrow pass. We can set a rockfall. It will block their path. It will give us time. The outlaws will not expect it. They are too arrogant." He took Silent Bow and a few of the younger warriors with him. They rode ahead, their horses silent ghosts in the fading light, finding the narrow pass a long, winding stretch of rock that was perfect for a trap. It was a geological feature of immense power, a natural choke point that would force the outlaws to a face-to-face confrontation, but only if they were prepared. The warriors worked quickly, their movements silent and efficient. They loosened rocks from the high cliffs, setting them in a precarious position, ready to be released at a single command. The work was hard, their hands raw and their muscles burning, but they worked in silence, their shared purpose a bond that transcended language and culture. They were fighting for their home, for their family, for their future. That gave them a strength that was greater than any numbers. When they were finished, they waited. They hid in the shadows, their bows and rifles ready. The air was heavy with anticipation, with the quiet tension of the hunter waiting for its prey. They were a small force, a handful of men against a pack of wolves, but they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting with the strength of their ancestors, with the spirit of the wind, with the love of their families. The outlaws finally arrived. They were a large group, a rough and brutal band of men, their faces grim and their eyes filled with a cruel resolve. They rode through the pass, their horses' hooves a loud, rhythmic sound on the hard rock, a testament to their arrogance. They were confident, too confident. They didn't see the men in the shadows. They didn't see the trap. They didn't see the ghost warrior. John gave a single, sharp whistle, the signal. Silent Bow, with a fierce cry, released the first rock. It tumbled down the cliff, a thunderous, earth-shattering sound followed by a torrent of rocks and dust. The outlaws' horses panicked, rearing and whinnying, their riders thrown to the ground in a tangle of limbs and profanity. The Apache warriors, silent and deadly, responded with a volley of arrows. their tips glinting in the pale moonlight. The outlaws, now in a state of chaos, returned fire, but their shots were wild and desperate, their confidence shattered. The battle was quick and brutal. John fired his rifle not at the men but at the ground in front of them, his shots precise and disorienting, a ghost of a sound in the chaos. He was a man of shadows, a man who knew how to fight a different kind of war. The outlaws, defeated and humiliated, retreated. Their numbers diminished, their spirits broken. They had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, but John knew they would not give up. They were like a wounded animal, and they would return with a new vengeance. He and the warriors rode back to the main column, their hearts filled with a mix of relief and dread. They had won a small victory, but the war was not over. The outlaws were still out there, and they were still a threat. The final stand was coming, and John knew that this time he would not be able to use the shadows. This time he would have to face them in the light. The final destination was a narrow canyon mouth that led into the heart of the new valley. It was the perfect place for a final stand, a natural choke point that would force the outlaws to a face-to-face confrontation. The canyon, with its high, unyielding walls and its narrow, winding path, was a natural fortress, a place where a small force could hold off a much larger one. John, Nightwind, and Skywalker had planned this. It was a calculated risk, a gamble that they were willing to take. They had to make their stand here, on the doorstep of their new home. They had to show them that they were not just a people on the run, but a people who would fight for their right to live in peace. The tribe was tired, but their spirits were high. They had endured the long march, they had faced the outlaws, and they had won. They had found a new strength, a new resolve, a new purpose. The women and children were led into the valley, their faces filled with a mix of fear and hope, their eyes wide with wonder at the beauty of the sanctuary they had found. The warriors, their faces painted with the colors of war, took their positions. They were a small force, a handful of men and women, but they were fighting for something more than just land. They were fighting for their future. The outlaws finally arrived. They were a large group, a mob of grizzled, hard-faced men, their eyes filled with a fierce resolve. They were led by the man with the black hat, his face a mask of rage and a burning hatred. He had been humiliated, and he was here for revenge. He looked at the narrow canyon, at the small force of warriors, and a cruel smile spread across his face. He thought they were easy prey. He thought he had won. He was wrong. The battle began with a roar. The outlaws, with a brutal ferocity, charged into the canyon, their guns blazing, their shouts a cacophony of rage and profanity. The Apache warriors, silent and deadly, responded with a volley of arrows, their tips finding their marks with a deadly accuracy. The canyon was a maelstrom of sound, a deafening symphony of gunfire, war cries, and the thundering hooves of horses. It was a clash of two worlds, of two ways of life, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the force of their struggle. John was in the thick of it, his rifle a silent sentinel in his hands, a symbol of the world he had left behind, but a weapon he now used to protect his new one. He was a ghost no more. He was a man, a warrior, a leader. He fought with a fierce resolve, his mind a steel trap of tactics and strategy. He was not just fighting for survival, he was fighting for his family, for the people who had given him a new life. He was no longer a man who had fled from violence, but a man who had chosen to face it head-on, for the sake of a people he had come to love. Nightwind was a force of nature. She moved with a fluid grace, her bow a silent, deadly weapon. She was a warrior of the spirit, a woman who fought with a fierce resolve, her every movement a prayer for the lives of her people. She was fighting for her people, for her family, for a future that was worth dying for. She and John fought side by side, their movements a seamless, rhythmic dance. He would fire and she would move, her arrows a silent response to his rifle's roar. They were a single unit, a single purpose, a single will. The battle raged for hours. The outlaws were relentless, but the Apache warriors were tenacious. They knew the land, its every nook and cranny. They used the high ground, the narrow passes, the shadows of the rocks to their advantage. They were a small force, but they were fighting with a strength that was greater than any numbers. They were fighting with the spirit of the wind, the spirit of the earth, the spirit of a people who would not be broken. The final stand had begun, and John knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the war for their survival was about to reach its brutal and definitive climax. The air in the canyon was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the coppery tang of blood. The initial frantic fury of the battle had settled into a grim, grinding endurance. The sound was no longer a chaotic roar, but a steady, brutal symphony of war. The sharp cracks of rifles echoing off the rock faces, the low, powerful thrum of bowstrings, the ragged shouts of men and the whimpering of the wounded. The outlaws, though shaken by the fierce, cunning Apache resistance, were relentless. Their leader, the man with the black hat, was a relentless force of brutal will, his rage a tangible presence on the battlefield. He was a man consumed by a thirst for vengeance, not just for the loss of his men or his dignity, but for the very insult of having been outsmarted by a ghost. He was here for revenge, and he would not be denied. He was a force of destruction, and his singular focus was on finding the man who had caused him so much grief. John and Nightwind were a living testament to the power of their bond, a deadly, seamless partnership in the heart of the maelstrom. John, with his rifle, was a ghost of precision. His shots aimed to disarm and disrupt rather than to kill. He used his knowledge of a white man's war, of tactics and strategy, of the psychological impact of a well-placed shot, to outwit his opponents. He had learned in the Civil War that killing was a necessity, but here, in this fight for a new home, he saw it as a last resort. He was a man who had fled from violence, but now he was a master of it, using his grim knowledge to save lives, not to take them. Nightwind, with her bow, was an extension of the earth, her arrows a silent, deadly expression of her people's resolve. She moved with a fluid grace, a silent warrior in the chaos. Her movements were a prayer for the lives of her people, her focus an unyielding force of nature. She and John moved together, their communication a silent ballet of glances, of nods, of a shared understanding that transcended words. He would fire, and she would move, her arrows a silent response to his rifle's roar. They were a single unit, a single purpose, a single will. The climax of the battle came when the outlaw leader, a man consumed by a thirst for vengeance, broke through the Apache line. He was a large man, his face a mask of fury, his gun a smoking extension of his will. His eyes, cold and filled with a cruel resolve, scanned the battlefield looking for John, the man who had humbled him, the man who had taken away his pride. "You're a dead man, Rancho," he roared, his voice a guttural sound of rage that echoed off the canyon walls. "How you thought you could hide from me? You thought you could defeat me? I'm going to finish this." He lunged forward, his gun aimed at John's chest. John, his rifle empty, his body bruised and exhausted, drew his pistol. He was a man who had fled from violence, but now he was facing it head-on. "You brought this on yourself," he said, his voice low and steady, a profound sense of purpose in every word. "You picked a fight with a people who just wanted to live in peace." The outlaw leader laughed, a cruel, humorless sound that was more a sneer than a genuine expression of mirth. "Peace? There's no peace in this land, Rancho. Only the strong survive, and I am the strongest. This land is for the taking. The meek will inherit nothing but a shallow grave." He raised his gun, his finger on the trigger, a triumphant, hateful glint in his eyes. But before he could fire, an arrow, silent and deadly, found its mark. It was not a killing shot. It was aimed at his arm, a precise and deliberate act that severed his muscle and bone, a shot of profound precision that spoke to a lifetime of training. He screamed, his gun falling to the ground with a loud thud. He looked at Nightwind, a flicker of surprise and fury in his eyes. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated them all. John, with a swift movement, moved in. He didn't use his gun. He used his fists, his body. He was no longer a soldier. He was a man defending his home. The fight was brutal, a raw, visceral exchange of blows. The outlaw leader was strong, a man of brute force and violent rage, but John was stronger. He had the strength of a man who was fighting for a family, for a people, for a future. The fight was not just a physical one. It was a clash of two worlds, of two philosophies. It was the brutal, nihilistic worldview of the outlaws against the profound, life-affirming spirit of the Apache. The fight ended with a final, decisive blow. The outlaw leader lay on the ground, defeated, his body broken, his spirit crushed. He looked at John, a flicker of something in his eyes, not hatred, but a profound, unyielding defeat. He had lost. He had lost to a ghost, to a people he had once thought of as savages, to a man who had found his purpose in a world he had once fled. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader defeated, their spirits broken, turned and fled. They were a defeated army, a ghost of their former selves. The final stand was over. The battle was won. John and Nightwind, their bodies tired, their souls weary, stood together in the middle of the canyon. The air was now filled with a different kind of sound, the sound of relief, of quiet celebration. The warriors, their faces grim but their eyes filled with a new light, gathered around them. They had won. They had fought for their new home, and they had won. But the victory was not without cost. There were casualties, both on their side and on the other. There were men who would not see the new dawn, men who had given their lives for a future they would not live to see. The canyon, once a place of war, was now a place of profound and solemn silence. The final battle was over, and the tribe, battered but unbroken, had found a new home, a home that was born of fire, of sacrifice, and of a profound and quiet love. The days that followed were a blur of work and emotion, a time of profound transition for the tribe. They were weary from the battle, their bodies aching and their souls heavy with grief, but they were filled with a new energy. They had fought for their new home, and now they were ready to build it. They moved into the valley, their movements filled with a sense of purpose and a quiet joy. The women and children, their faces a mix of relief and wonder, explored their new surroundings. The men, their bodies tired but their spirits high, began the work of building a new community. John was no longer an outsider. He was a part of the tribe, a part of the family. He was a hero, a leader, a ghost warrior who had led them to a new home. He worked tirelessly, helping to build the new wiki-ups, helping to prepare the land for planting, helping to care for the wounded. He was a man of action, a man who had found his purpose in the work of his hands. He brought his knowledge of building and his understanding of efficiency to the task, teaching the men how to use simple tools and how to work together as a cohesive unit. He was no longer a man of war, but a man of peace, and his purpose was to build, not to destroy. Nightwind was his partner in every sense of the word. She was a leader, a healer, a woman who had given her people a new home. She moved with a grace that was both fierce and gentle, her hands a balm to the wounded, her voice a comfort to the grieving. She was a woman of the earth, a woman of the wind, a woman who had found her destiny in the most unexpected of places. She and John worked side by side, their movements a seamless dance of shared purpose. He would build, and she would heal. He would work, and she would care. They were a single unit, a single purpose, a single heart. The tribe mourned their dead, their ceremonies a profound and solemn expression of their grief. They gathered in the center of the valley, their voices a low rhythmic chant that rose to the high cliffs. They told stories of the fallen, of their bravery, of their sacrifice. They honored the men who had given their lives for their new home, their songs a tribute to their bravery and their sacrifice. They painted their faces with the colors of grief, a visible sign of their sorrow. John, though an outsider, was a part of their grief, a part of their healing. He had fought for them, he had bled for them, and now he mourned with them. He sat in the circle of grieving men, his head bowed, his heart heavy with the weight of their loss. He was no longer a man alone. He was a man who shared in their sorrow, a man who was a part of their healing. One evening, as they sat by a fire, the stars a brilliant blanket above them, Skywalker came to him. He was no longer just a chief. He was a father, a man who had seen his people through the fire and into the light. He looked at John, his eyes filled with a deep and profound sense of gratitude. "You have given us a new home," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "You have given us a new life. You are a ghost warrior, but you are also our son." The words were a heavy gift, a mark of respect that John felt he had not earned. He had fought for them, yes, but he had also brought the violence to their doorstep. He had been a man of war. "I am grateful," John said, "for your trust, for your friendship." The chief nodded. He looked at his daughter, then back at John. "My daughter, she has found her heart," he said, "and her heart is with you." The words were a profound and emotional moment, a public acknowledgement of their bond. John looked at Nightwind, her face a serene mask of happiness. She was his home, his family, his future. He had come to this land to forget, but he had found that this land, with its quiet wisdom and its deep spirit, had helped him to remember the kind of man he wanted to be. He was no longer a man of war, but a man of peace. He was no longer a man alone, but a man with a family. He was a ghost warrior, yes, but he was also a man who had found his place in the world, in the heart of a woman he loved, in the heart of a people who had welcomed him home. The Valley of Peace was now a reality, a place of hope and of profound and enduring love. Time passed in the Valley of Peace, a slow, gentle rhythm that was a profound contrast to the brutal chaos of the world they had fled. The seasons changed, the sun rose and set, and the tribe flourished in their new home. The wickiups grew, the gardens bloomed with corn and squash, and the laughter of children filled the air once more. The valley was a sanctuary, a place of peace, a place of profound and enduring life. The past was not forgotten, but it was no longer a burden. It was a part of their story, a part of their journey. John was no longer the ghost warrior. He was a man with a new name, a new purpose, a new life. He was called Heart of the Mountain by the people, a name that reflected his profound connection to the valley and to the people he had saved. It was a name that spoke of his strength, his resilience, and his quiet love for the land and its people. He had a new life, a new family, a new home. He and Nightwind were a living testament to the truth that two different worlds could come together to form a single, powerful whole. They were married in a quiet, solemn ceremony, their vows a simple, powerful promise of a life lived together. Their love was not just a feeling, it was a testament to their shared struggles, their shared hopes, their shared destiny. It was a love that was born of fire, of sacrifice, and of a profound and quiet understanding. John was now a part of the daily life of the tribe. He was a hunter, a warrior, a father figure. He taught the young boys how to track animals, how to use a rifle. He taught them about the world outside the valley, the world they had fled from. He was a bridge between two worlds, a man who could speak both languages, a man who could understand both cultures. He was a teacher, a mentor, a man who had found his purpose in the work of his hands and in the sharing of his knowledge. Nightwind was his partner in every sense of the word. She was a healer, a leader, a mother. She taught the young girls about the plants, about the spirits of the earth. She taught them about the power of a woman, about the strength of a spirit that was of the wind. She was a woman who had once been alone, but who had found her home in the heart of a man she loved. Their life was a quiet, profound rhythm of work and love. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, their hands touching, their hearts filled with a quiet contentment. They had faced the fire, they had faced the war, and they had come out on the other side, their love a testament to their endurance. They had built a life together, a life that was a testament to their love, a life that was a promise kept. The past was no longer a ghost, it was a part of their story. The future was not a fear, it was a promise. One evening, as the sun began to set over the high cliffs, John looked at her. "I have no regrets," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur. "I came here to forget, but I have found that I have a new life to remember. I have a home, I have a family, I have you." He spoke of the long, lonely years he had spent as a ghost, a man who had lost everything. He spoke of the profound sense of loss, of the deep-seated grief that had haunted him for so long. He spoke of the moment he found her, of the moment he chose to fight for her, of the moment he chose to live again. He had come here to die, but he had found a new life. He had come here to forget, but he had found a new memory. She smiled, a quiet, gentle thing. "You are no longer a ghost," she said. "You are a man, and you are my home. The past is a part of our story, but it is not our destiny. Our destiny is here, in this valley, in this life, in this love." He looked at the valley, at the wickiups, at the children playing in the meadow. He had once been a man who had nothing, a man who had lost everything, but now he had a home, he had a family, he had a future, he had a promise to keep, the promise of a new life, a new beginning, a new home. He was a ghost warrior, yes, but he was also a man who had found his place in the world, in the heart of a woman he loved, in the heart of a people who had welcomed him home. The sun set, casting a long, beautiful shadow over the Valley of Peace, and in the heart of that peace, John Carter, the rancho who fought for a woman and found a new life, knew that his journey was not just a journey of a new life, but a journey of a new heart, a heart that was no longer empty but filled with the promise of a forever that was as vast and as beautiful as the land itself.